Welcome back to another edition of the FODcast, the show that brings to you cutting-edge insights into the future of digital commerce from the biggest leaders operating in the space right now. Every 2 weeks, we are bringing you interviews with people who are either dominating or innovating within the digital commerce sector. These people have kindly given up their time to tell their story, all in aid of providing you with a glimpse of the future of digital commerce. We will be bringing you people from all spheres of digital commerce, from retailers and systems integrators to software vendors and full-service digital agencies. Today, I am very excited to welcome to the edition of the podcast, Kevin Murray. Kev is the Managing Director of Greenlight Commerce, currently one of the leading digital commerce agencies in the UK, delivering best-in-class enterprise scale implementations to retailers across the globe. Kev, we have known each other for almost a decade now.
It is nearly 10 years. It absolutely is. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, it's gone quick. And despite your dubious rugby affiliations, we've worked together on and off for the whole time.
The accent will give it away, right? So
yeah, it's not hard to work out, right? And we don't want to talk about the recent Six Nations. We're going to leave.
No, that didn't happen this year.
No, absolutely not. So I've watched you take Greenlight Commerce from startup to one of the few agnostic digital transformation agencies that has a solid reputation for delivering successfully the e-com platforms from SAP CX, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, right the way through to BigCommerce. So that is my introduction. Hopefully I did you justice. However, it'd be good for you to give us a bit of an intro to yourself as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So Greenlight Commerce, I joined that business, nearly 8 years ago now. Actually, Greenlight Commerce was spun out of a company called Greenlight Digital, which has been in operation for nearly 21 years. So the founders of that business, when they started it, they were very much focused on kind of marketing and digital marketing and customer acquisition services. So, back then when it started, SEO and PPC and kind of driving digital traffic. As the business kind of evolved, they were looking at bringing new lines to kind of support their customers, one of them being e-commerce implementations and builds. So when I joined the business, we started off a small practice in helping some of those businesses with their e-commerce implementations, and we span off Greenlight Commerce into a separate entity, really much to kind of drive the kind of the descriptions of our business, because ultimately our buyers of our services are very different. And as it stands now, between Greenlight Commerce and Greenlight Digital, we've 15 different service lines that we offer our customers, and trying to be that full service agency, but having very much specialisms and specific areas of us being e-commerce and systems integration implementation. And that's been our forte, and e-commerce and building companies and being involved in companies like this and helping them grow and helping our clients grow is something I've been involved with for about nearly 15 years now.
Okay. So going back to what you said about Greenlight Commerce, I failed to mention that in my intro. But does that mean, from your point of view, that you got the opportunity to build Greenlight Commerce with that foundation already in place from Greenlight itself?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was one of those things where, like we kind of see in the world of those businesses who want to pick, partners when it comes to e-commerce. You'll have some partners who will be like full service digital agencies, so they'll have a bit of SEO, a bit of PPC. But sometimes we can be considered maybe lighter on the technical side, so lighter on the integration side. When it comes to maybe more of the enterprise grade, kind of heavy lifting of large systems integration, large systems at scale, building large platforms to support the needs of kind of some of the large businesses or complex businesses. On the other side, you kind of have your systems integrators, which are very, very good at the big projects, the transformation projects, implementations of heavy tech and heavy engineering, but probably couldn't tell you what SEO stands for, right? So actually what we wanted to do, and what the vision of kind of the founders of Greenlight wanted to do, was that, well, why couldn't we be both? What we found, though, is that when I joined the Greenlight Digital business, there was always that kind of idea of, oh, you're just an agency, you don't know the technology side, you're not one of the SIs, you're not the heavy lifters. So we kind of said, okay, we have to try and change our name or reinvent ourselves, even though taking some of the equity we have in Greenlight, but maybe call it, Greenlight Commerce, being actually, no, we are very specifically in this industry, and therefore we can make a name for ourselves, and therefore try and speak to the decision makers who are more interested in that technology decision making, or are very much focused in that enterprise e-commerce needs, but is more than just the, if you like, the, oh, can you guys just build a website? Because, you know, actually what we know is when you go live with a website, and once you get it integrated, once you get it working at scale, that's just when the fun starts, right? That's when the interesting stuff happens. And so therefore, by spinning us off and still keeping then Greenlight, but then trying to build our kind of capability or our reputation of being a systems integrator from the ground up, or ultimately a person who can, a business who can sit in 1 foot in the systems integration and 1 foot in the kind of digital marketing background, because our heritage was in that. We felt we actually would be a little bit different. And in fact, there's very few businesses in the UK who are like us, who I think do both very well. There's usually one guys who do great digital marketing, customer acquisition strategies, and there's businesses who are great at the integration side of things. And there's only a handful of us, I think, that do both of them very well and who have that reputation and ability to be able to speak with in-depth knowledge about both at the same time. And so kind of in some ways it felt like a bit of a startup in some ways, because we had to kind of trade in our name of Greenlight. Goes, oh, well, you guys only do SEO. No. We do a lot more. Let us sit down and give us 20 minutes and we'll tell you how we can, you know, get the left arm of the customer acquisition, the right arm of technology, and show you how you put them together. The sum of their parts really allow you as a business to have massive digital growth. And then to a lot of extent, we called ourselves growth architects, because actually, and digital growth architects, that's what we were. Take the e-commerce, take the digital marketing, put them together, and the sum of the parts kind of deliver a lot more.
Yeah, that's a good point there, Kev, as well, because actually, like you mentioned, from an enterprise commerce point of view, very few companies offer the full end-to-end service. When you look at the lower end of the spectrum, like WooCommerce, etc., even Magento in some cases, non-enterprise, you might get businesses that offer the full end-to-end, but actually, as soon as you start hitting those enterprise business, multi-million turnover, etc., then actually having a company that can offer both to a high standard isn't out there, and actually is probably very appealing to a lot of businesses.
We kind of feel it is, James. And I think a lot of that is because, you know, if I take the concept of e-commerce, right, let's take things at a very basic level, right? Everyone knows what e-commerce is, buying stuff online. So, you know, you kind of think, oh, it's easy. You just put a cart online and add a few products, you take payment, done, right? And actually, my point has always been, you know, I've been, before I got into e-commerce, I was involved in financial services and debt collection recovery software, things like that, and pensions and investment software. So very much on the FS side of things. And so actually coming into e-commerce, I was thinking, oh, this will be easy. And actually, you know what? E-commerce is easy to pick up, but hard to master. And what we kind of find is it really, and when you take those simple concepts of, hey, it's just a cart, it's just a store, what we kind of, and I think what happens is that businesses who get into e-commerce or agencies who get into e-commerce kind of naively think it's the same way, in the same way as systems integrators who are hardcore technology think, oh, SEO is very easy, right? You just put a few keywords on the site. And, you know, what's the issue here? Like, you know, and I think what we found, certainly in my experience, has been the mutual respect of understanding those different points of view. Actually, then you realize, right, you know, there's really parts missing at either end of the scale. And therefore, businesses who are disrespectful about one type of specialism in either digital marketing or the other way in e-commerce are the ones who are going to be set up to fail, because they think everything's easy. They think it's easy and don't understand the nuances. So what we try to do is you know, when we talk about enterprise, it usually just means that we're already trying to, you're using our experience to think about what are the impacts of what you're doing and how can that affect the customer experience? How is it going to affect the integrations? How is it going to affect the operating of a website day to day? So from our perspective, we kind of think at that simple level, okay, you want to have a website that just has products, someone buys them, that's it. And we think about, okay, well, how do the products get into the website? How often do they change? How dynamic should the pricing be? How, if a B2B client, does the pricing change depending upon who you are? What promotions do you put in? When someone buys a product, what happens if there's a return? What happens if the payments need to be split? What happens if there's 5 items in the basket and the customer can, or the business can only fulfill 4? Does the person have to ring up and say, sorry, we can only fulfill 4? Or if they're doing 10,000 orders a day and that's not practical, do we have to automate the system to make sure that we tell the customer, sorry, we can only get 4 to you, we've refunded one of your items? You suddenly open up this idea of what an operation looks like and how much of that should you automate, or how much of it should you just have as a business process. And once you've identified that, you kind of have a better idea of how much these systems are going to cost, how much they're going to integrate, how much work it's going to be. That's enterprise. That's what the difference is. And why it's important is because the later in the software development lifecycle you identify these problems, the more expensive it is to everybody. So you try and think about them up front, because the worst thing can happen is that you find out all of these issues just before you're about to go live, or you find out all of these issues halfway through your build, because suddenly you're creating large kind of problems that become much harder to fix later on down the line. And again, that's not to say as well either that you kind of have to think about everything up front. For those people who are in development, that's waterfall, and that's not the case. But it's about knowing which issues you say you're going to deal with now, and what issues you say, look, these issues are going to be problems later, but we're going to deal with them later because our platforms are flexible enough to cater for them just in time.
Yeah, and Joe, it's funny you mentioned the different challenges that companies face and how things have evolved so much. Actually, one of our previous guests, he's a former VP at like Hybris and Spryker. He's now gone off on his own venture, and he set up his own business called All Commerce is Digital, and he's specifically going into retailers and B2B businesses in order to help educate them internally about what to expect from these transformations, because there is just a real lack of knowledge in these huge businesses. And actually, it's not just about bringing in third parties to do the work, it's about upskilling your team as well. But interesting, you talk about your past, Kevin, I guess how you got into commerce from your financial services background and what have you. I want to take you back to uni quickly, actually, because something that's been discussed with a couple of guests is, do you need a technology specific degree to have a successful career in this industry? So what's your thoughts around that?
So I think, I probably come from a slightly different angle. I probably have an interesting story in terms of how I've got here. So I started off, when I was in school, so kind of school back in Dublin in Ireland, computers were something I loved, right? So my dad, I grew up and lived in London, and I lived in Marble Arch. Parents, we ran a pub there. And I still remember in 1986, my dad took all the tips he had from running the pub, went to Selfridges, and came back with a Commodore 64 back in 1986, right? So, spent £850, I think it was. He had this old bottle of all pound coins at the time that he had. And actually, interestingly, from there, I was hooked into computers, right? So able to, in the corner shop, being able to get Commodore 64 magazine, writing in BASIC, playing games, that for me, that was it, and so I was one of those very lucky people who very early on realized I wanted to turn a kind of hobby into a career. And again, through luck, and I was able to kind of do that based upon where the world has gone in the industry that we've gone into now. So actually, when it came to school, I had a choice. So I had a opportunity to go to university full time, or at the time, a past pupil of the school who I had worked in was coming in back doing a career day. He was an actuary, so he was somebody who was very well known within the school because he was somebody who had top honors within the school. And he came into the school and said to the computer teachers, we're offering a scholarship for anybody who's into computers, because Y2K is coming. So those of you who don't know that, and that's a whole other podcast, right? But we're looking for software engineers, software developers, and we want to pluck them straight out of school. So I was called into a meeting by the headmaster and said, look, Kevin, you've got an opportunity to go to university. Or actually, we've got an opportunity that if you wanted to, you could take a scholarship that you can go to university at nights and work as a junior software engineer during the day, and learn on the job. Albeit the caveat being is that I had to do 1 year of full-time university first, and I'd have a guaranteed job for my after the first year. I would then do night school, second, third, and for the rest of it. And I remember speaking to my parents about it, and the one thing they were absolutely adamant of was having third level education. So they kind of said my parents, again, never did. They never finished school due to issues with either looking after family or it just wasn't for them, and so neither of them had a school qualification. And it was very important for me and my sister to make sure we had that qualification. So I remember speaking to them, and they said, actually, if you're at the end of it, if you're going to get your qualification, that's what's important. But if you can do it and someone's going to pay for it, because I was going to have to pay for it myself in university anyway. I didn't have the luxury of having parents to be able to pay for university for me. I said, okay, rather than getting a part-time job to pay for full-time uni, flip it. Let me get a full-time job and then use that to try and help towards paying for nighttime uni that the company were going to pick up the tab for in part as well.
Sounds like a win-win for me. Yeah.
No, that's what I did, right? And actually it worked out really well for me. And because again, I was able to turn a hobby into a career. And therefore, and with anything, so going back, the long answer to this question, I suppose, in some ways, is that if you've got a passion for something, that's what will elevate you. But make no mistake about, as more people become more familiar with the ability to be able to be an expert when you're starting off in your career, you have to have a way of differentiating yourself. So if you, for me, having it, while I was able to differentiate myself and be able to showcase, and people knew I was good at computers, now, and in the past, university has been a differentiator show. So unless you've, the other way I'd say is like, well, maybe if a degree isn't important, some level of third level education is to show, or some level of education or differentiator is important to show how to learn, how to be flexible. And instead, if you don't have that, you got to have something else. Either it's a side hustle, you've started your own internet business, you started your own e-commerce business, you've built software, you contribute to open source projects. That's maybe the table stakes now.
Okay.
And I think, I wouldn't necessarily think that, again, university or third level education, I think is important, but maybe not for the important reason that people thought it was many years ago. Life experience is important as academic education, and people need to understand themselves and understand for themselves where they sit. I remember I think my dad used to say to me, you can't fit a square peg through a round hole, right? So if somebody is not ready or not akin to maybe third level education yet, they need to find another way of getting themselves to the top. And that's where the creativeness comes in. They need to understand, be good at what you do, love what you do, be creative at what you do, hustle, and you'll find ways of getting what you want out of life. And at the moment, it's just there is no single path, but you got to work hard.
So what you're saying basically is that you feel as though it gave you that platform to build your success on, but actually it was really your passion that stood you apart from everybody else. And I think that's probably fair, right? I would agree in your comment in that university isn't perceived in the same light as how it maybe was 10 years ago. It's certainly still a very beneficial path for a lot of reasons that we don't really need to discuss right now. But actually, it's about what does this person bring to the table from a development point of view. Now, there's if you've got your open source labs like your GitHubs and what have you, where people can contribute code bases to that, are now quite common in interviews. You don't need to have gone to university to be able to do that. You've got side hustles from an entrepreneurial point of view. So there's a lot more that you can bring to the table now than just a master's in computer science, for example.
Exactly, especially when I see someone if somebody has a master's in computer science, I think it's impressive, but I think it's also very academic. So it's always saying, okay, that's great, you've got an academic baseline, but if you're going to work with a company like Greenlight Commerce, and one of the things I think we're very good at doing, and I know that you guys have supported us many years in this, is acquiring good talent, and actually not even good talent, amazing talent, because I think you're as good as, in a consultancy like ours, you're as good as the people you put in front of a client, you're as good as the people who deliver revenue for you as a business on behalf of a customer. And so for us, it's, anybody who comes to the table with entrepreneurial spirit, who is able to be seen above everybody else, kind of goes a long way. If somebody has a degree as a bachelor's or a master's or a bachelor of science, and as a postgrad or a master, even a kind of something else that stands them out, they can communicate it, they'll do quite well. And I think it's sometimes there's a really good place for kind of more academic style students, and there's more of a place students who've got their degree, but that's not what defined them. They really enjoyed the process, and it's about, okay, here's what I can do with this now. And it can be more entrepreneurial. That really goes a long way as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly for some of the leadership roles in this space, which is so fast paced and innovative, you need to be an outside of the box thinker, and I think that a lot of that comes from real life and real world experiences, right? And bringing ideas through to fruition, succeeding, failing, etc.
Exactly. And I think that's why, to a certain extent, you have to do your time. And what I've seen people who really want to run up the kind of the corporate ladder and the experience ladder, your ceiling is usually going to be your experience. And what I mean is and people sometimes think age and experience are the same thing, and they're not. It's people who kind of have put themselves into positions, who've done extracurricular things, who have been entrepreneurial, who's taken a gamble, who've tried things, who bring things to the table. They're the ones who kind of who have created more experience for themselves, even if they're the same age as some of their peers. Those who kind of embrace it and do other things and extra things, they're the ones who want to go places and also understand where their position is within an organization and where they want to get to. Usually it's that they're the ones who kind of will achieve faster and quicker, if that's what's right for them. Again, you need a good balance of different types of skills and people within a business to survive. And that's why they have this pyramid, right? You have some people who just come in, they do their 9, they do to 5, and are brilliant at doing that. And they're the ones that are workhorses and they just get on with things. There's others who are more entrepreneurial, who want to do extra hours, who want to do more things, who want to push the envelope of their boundaries of themselves. There's a place in the business for them too. And you have to get the right balances of your staff to be able to have yourselves a kind of a well-rounded organization.
So on the note of experience, Kev, your role has changed quite a bit over the years, from the Portal Tech days and then moving into Greenlight and then Greenlight Commerce and spinning out as its own separate entity. So what have been the big changes for you over the past 5 or 6 years in your role?
I think probably the biggest one, which was the hardest one for me at the start, was to let go of the technology side of things. And what I meant by that is like getting my hands dirty and coding. And, like when we first met, I was the kind of, I've gone through the roles of head of development and engineering director up through to kind of, enterprise architect and then practice director and then ultimately managing director as a business today. And as you kind of go through those steps, you kind of let go more of the technology and you embrace the business more and ultimately your client's business more. That's kind of the role. And I kind of have to be good at being able to hire and let go of some of the technology decisions that we'd make with regards to approaches of how we'd build solutions. And so leave that to my architects, leave that to my team leads and go, look, you guys, that's your bag now, and do some proof of concept, do things. I haven't coded, I haven't hit keys in years. Part of me kind of misses it and part of me doesn't, because I've kind of had my time on that. I've done that. I'll move on. I'll let somebody else have a go in that. And, I've kind of a more now part of my role is about making sure that I can engage with clients and speak to them at their level with regards to what's important for them. And typically, in a lot of cases, the technology isn't important for them. The business is important for them. And I just need to help them make sure that the technology decisions they're making are the right ones, because ultimately it's the business that needs to ensure that it's become successful based upon their technology choices. And in a lot of cases, they want to know the technology does what they want it to do. They usually don't care so much about the technology because the technology is only the enabler. And therefore, kind of that's for me, it's the large part of my role is that consultative element and making sure that we as a business align with the right technologies and the right partners that we believe are the best subset of technology, pre-selected technologies that we think the clients who will want to work with us, who value our opinion, will then gravitate towards or be happy that we've partnered with them. And then, the other part of my role is keeping my shareholders happy, making sure that they understand that the returns and investment that they are putting into the business as we're growing, and ultimately keeping the staff and the people that we have happy who want to come on this journey. Because if you've got happy staff, happy shareholders, and then you got therefore have happy clients, then I'll be happy, right? That becomes that ecosystem that kind of makes it work. So it's getting less hands-on in tech, and over time just being more involved in being interested in what my staff are interested in, what my shareholders are interested in, and what my clients are going to be interested in.
Yeah, I can completely resonate with that in terms of the letting go. It's not tech for me, it's the actual hands-on recruitment and being more involved in actually running the business. Where are we going as a business? What's the strategy? How are we executing that strategy? And it goes back to your point about bringing on the best, the most amazing people you can, because that's the thing that I've realized is I just have to make sure I'm bringing on people who are better at those jobs than me and allowing them to be better and do their thing, really.
It is. Well, I said, like, part of that is letting go. You kind of have to need to draw the vision and go, that's where I want to go. These are the kind of, the parameters or the constraints within which we have to work within. And then if they say, yeah, I can do that, great. That's yours now. I'm going to get out of your way. You tell me what you need from me. Otherwise, you crack on with it. Easier said than done. I'll still dip into things. I'll still be on, sales calls with prospects, and I'll still bang on and talk too much, as I'm sure anybody who's listening to this will kind of understand and see. But again, when you're passionate about something, it's hard to let go, and it's hard not to talk about it well, because and you want to be able to convey, and that's the biggest thing I've learned, is that sometimes I have to stop talking about Greenlight and stop talking about what we can do, and just let my team show what they can do. Which is and sometimes that, in the most cases, that the clients get it, then they get it. It's not just me, it's the team, and that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of innovation, how would you say Greenlight's innovating within that digital commerce tech space right now? What are you guys doing differently?
It's one of those things where it might sound counterintuitive, but one of the things we try to do is kind of go back to basics a little bit, because actually what we found is that we'll have, when we compare ourselves against either what the competition's doing or what the clients are looking for, in some ways doing a good job well seems to be forgotten. We hear lots of stories about businesses in failed projects or wrong decision making, or to that point James mentioned earlier on, we found lots of clients of businesses where they were probably misinformed, or it turns out the people they trusted were only 2 pages ahead in the manual than they were, and ended up having a wrong agenda of decision making. So what we kind of think of what we're doing at a practical level is trying to go back to basics, being honest with the clients, and sometimes honestly they don't like, and because sometimes they don't like to hear bad news, but we don't hide against bad news. I always tell every client we work with, something wrong is going to happen. And let's, if anybody tells you that everything's perfect, they're lying, right? I've done this so many times that, we try to make sure that we learn from each time, and we do, but then new problems always occur, new technology comes out, new gaps, new problems. And it's more about how businesses and how partners respond to that problem is really what makes the difference. Yeah. And so what we try to do is, which again sounds like it's new here, or it's progressive. It's not. So we try to be very honest with our clients. We try to be very transparent. We try to show them and work with them closely to solve the problems, right? And that's kind of one facet. The other facet, I suppose, then, based upon businesses who then progressed and are a bit more mature, we're trying to identify what their key problems are and trying to come up with solutions based upon working with partners of other different technologies or other third-party providers, to try and work with businesses to find out, okay, what's next? And again, having that digital marketing arm kind of creates that as an easy, kind of play. We can do a lot of analysis. We can do a lot of kind of customer acquisition strategies. We can do a lot of customer experience engagement and conversion rate optimization work, and say, okay, so you've just started the work, you've just done this. Here's where else you could go. Here's where else you could work. Here's, international could be a place you could go. Or have you looked at, chatbots as an idea? Now, I'm reticent sometimes to, again, through the learnings and back to your previous question, suddenly start talking tech to a client. It becomes very new, very shiny. You remember back in the days when people were starting to talk about beacons of the future, Bluetooth beacons. People would hear you walk into store, and it sounded like a great idea until people realize privacy is actually a thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm usually reticent to talk about, I've heard about this new tech. It's brilliant. It's going to solve your problems. Because usually what you're basically trying to do is sell a tech for a problem a client doesn't know they have.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do more, regularly, which we do with clients every quarter, is blue sky thinking sessions. Tell us more about your business. What big problems are you facing? Where do you want to go? What's your industry challenges? And then from that, we can come back and say, okay, based upon what we've said, we think we can match up these ideas, or we've thought about this problem. The amount of times we have clients who are suffering in silence, who say, do you know what, Kev? We have this button on the screen and it keeps on breaking, and something really small that they say, do you know what, if you could fix that for me, that would really make a lot. And we go, well, yeah, Jesus, if you told us this, of course we could fix this. Did you know A, B, or C? And they go, oh, wow, okay, we wish we had this forum to say this. And we kind of create those ideas. And so, but when it comes to the bigger stuff, it's like, what's your business problem? What sort of problem you're facing, or what, at QBRs we do, if they don't know, we'll ask some pertinent questions, such as, so as it stands at the moment, how much of your revenues are trying to move to more digital acquisition? And sometimes businesses will go, yeah, we're on a path to move 50% of all of our acquisition revenues being started from a digital journey. Or a customer will go, oh, geez, I don't know, I haven't really thought of that. Great. This is what other customers are doing. How about this? And that's actually a more consultative or more business-led conversation, or customer or digital marketing-led conversation will then drive out a roadmap of technology changes or technology roadmaps that you might want to have with your client over the next few years. And that's kind of what we're able to do. We noticed recently, and dealing with other projects we've picked up from other SIs and other systems integrators in the past, this is kind of the systems integration will come to the business and say, okay, what do you want to do next? And you'll suddenly find that the customer's like, oh, I don't know, what would you recommend?
Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, and you have to have something. And so otherwise it's just this back and forth. I don't know what you want to do. I don't know, what can you do? And so part of what we do still asks a lot of questions, but we try and position the questions more from a business perspective, and then eventually we'll have a bunch of answers. But at least we have that ability to be able to dig down or have a few ideas that could form the kernel of a strategy if a strategy doesn't exist.
So really just getting to grips with the actual problems and the implications of those problems on your client before you're going in trying to provide a solution. It's the key, I think.
Exactly, because I mean, ultimately, then you just, if you're not listening, you have to listen to the client. In many cases, probably you're not listening, or you're never going to know the industry as well as your client does. And while as industries we have a lot of experience with, and when we talk to new clients, we're able to showcase some of that experience. Each client's kind of different as well in the place that they operate in, and have their own constraints and their own challenges, their own supply chain problems and their own automation problems. And so once you know their specific problems, when you have some knowledge of the industry, if you're listening to them, there's always things you can do.
And is that one of the reasons why you remain agnostic in terms of platforms? Because a few of your competitors have gone specifically for one platform. Quite a few remain agnostic. I'm hearing a lot of conversations about the next big thing and whether or not some of your competitors are going to look at focusing just on the next big thing, but I'm not sure anyone's quite sure right now. But is that kind of approach why you remain agnostic?
It is, and I suppose there's a few reasons for that. So I felt that if we're only ever talking about one single technology, and I've worked in the past where we were only a single provider of one there's a couple of impacts. One is that sometimes your voice can be less credible because you're only able to answer a question knowing what the answer is always going to be. So you'll always be able, and therefore, it's sometimes a customer will say, well, I know you're telling me that this does this, but how do you know it's the only tech you work with? So that's kind of sometimes a challenge, and therefore you actually don't have an answer to that, right? It's just, therefore they will buy it or don't then, right, and move on. Or you end up having a challenge where I suppose the technology vendor themselves maybe is sometimes they can stagnate a little bit, and therefore you can't offer those things to that particular client as fast as you'd like to, and so you're kind of locked, and maybe you have the ambition to want to move further on than maybe the client does, and therefore that becomes a challenge. So I think, for us it was a bit like, right, we want to have a couple of options, but we don't want to be a generalist. So we don't want to basically say we do everything either, because again, you end up falling into that solution where if you don't know the technology well enough, you're just taking a massive gamble, and that's for you and your client, where you're just going, we think it's going to be this because we've worked with this other technology before, and that's just not great either. So we decided to strategically pick a handful of technologies that we do work with. You mentioned them earlier at the start, and it means we can put a lot of effort and time in working with those businesses, know that vendors know those technologies very well, and be an advocate to those about our customers and to our customers and clients, and be able to showcase what's good and what's bad about them, because there's no one size fits all. But then there's and again, when you make that investment and those items inside out, you can then deliver very well on them. Because for us is that if a customer asks us for a recommendation, once we know a bit more about them, we can then say, we think you're a good fit here, a good fit there. The technology we don't work with, we kind of felt either we'd already worked with a partner who were very similar to those technologies, or we felt actually we don't think that technology resonates with the clients we think are what they're going to want from us, in terms of not progressive enough, or the technology is not dynamic enough, or it's not new enough or interesting enough. And therefore we think it's either old, or just there's enough partners kind of working in that space and it's not new or interesting. So, so what? And I think that's not to say that we don't continually evaluate partners and look at new potential up and coming technologies to be able to work with. I'm just a little bit more stricter because it's our reputation and therefore it's our client's reputation. And so if I work with something, I want to be all in with it. I don't want to put another badge or a logo on our business and say, hey, we work with all of these people. And the reality is, if you have all those badges, you don't work with all those people. And therefore you don't know the technology, and you're probably chancing your arm and telling a client, yeah, we work with that. And then the minute they get off the phone, they go, right, developers, go read this manual. We're going to now run this project. And that's not how I want to operate, right? We're not a generalist. I want to be able to have integrity in the work what we do, and so stand behind everything that we do. And therefore I want to be more clued up and more aligned with the technologies we work with. And so for us, that was what was important. And if a customer says to us, hey, we want to work with this technology, do you work with it? We say, no, we don't. We don't, I'm not a partner with them. I recommend to you some other partners who do. But if you do want to have a work and talk about these technologies, or you want to discuss about what we think is right, these are the technologies we work with. Here's why we work with them. And if it resonates, great. And if it doesn't, hey, come back to us when you've thought about things a bit differently.
So you've spoken on LinkedIn an article about customers being in the driving seat at the moment, and is that a reflection, therefore, on the demands of retailers? They have a lot more in terms of demands, in terms of what they're expected to deliver, and therefore you need the various platforms available to you that you've chosen to be able to meet those retailers' demands, and therefore the customers' demands too.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a reflection of looking at what COVID has done over the last years, and while that's been a byproduct or a catalyst of something we've been speaking about a long time, particularly with the platforms we've worked with, is that clients are obviously going to be changing, and they're going to continue to expect different things from a business, and the business needs to make sure that they have the technology to be flexible enough to be able to meet that requirement, and whatever that requirement is, whether it's a subscription model, or whether it's extended ranges or better support to be able to return things. The platforms are going to be needed to be able to be flexible to do that. And actually, if we look at what that kind of Arthur was talking about in that driving seat, is what we're seeing is about this idea of what businesses think they are today may not be what they are tomorrow, because the customer's expectation will shift, but also environmental things will shift, which means that one day, and I think an article I posted recently, one day, if I take a very specific example of businesses who were probably delivering soaps and hand gels 18 months ago, could have been a small B2C boutique business who were maybe, look at our nice hand gels, look at fragrance, come and buy from us, could suddenly find them now a B2B kind of subscription business that I've suddenly, through their supply chain, are suddenly sending thousands of millions of pounds of hand gels and revenue through, because overnight the world changed. And those businesses who have the technology, who was able to support their flexibility, who suddenly very easily could go, we're now going to go B2B. We can now have to put contract pricing in place. We can actually quick orders. We can have EDI, direct integration, to be able to manage kind of system to system ordering rather than just manual intervention and typing in orders. Those businesses who could change quickly and flexibly straight away are the ones who can capitalize. And that's what we're seeing at the moment going forward, is that technology flexibility, and not just about flexibility around kind of what features and functionality and how fast you can go to market with them, but those businesses who can pivot. And that's not just the customer experience, but that's who's able to kind of all the way through the supply chain, all the way down to what one of our partners calls the intelligent enterprise, right? From the minute somebody has an idea to the minute you need to collect cash, you want to be able to support that. And that's where we're seeing the kind of next, in some ways it's like back to basics again, right? It's like, have you got the systems that will be flexible to think about what your client or customer may think about in the future? That's what CIOs and CTOs need to be asking themselves.
We've seen that pivot in a number of ways, and particularly businesses that were historically B2B having to switch up to be B2C, or be able to offer a B2C platform to be able to continue to sell over the course of the pandemic. There's been some clear and obvious changes to the way retailers operate through COVID. Is there anything else from your point of view that you've seen as a big COVID specific impact on digital commerce?
Other than I think things that are probably already obvious to a lot of people, I think is, the normal things, right? So obviously, as I mentioned, flexibility, faster turnaround times in terms of being able to change. probably a bit more focus on cost rather than opportunity. So a lot of people are trying to consolidate their costs because obviously depending on the sector they're in, there's this concern about, their existing costs of their existing infrastructures may not be considered acceptable. And so they have to change up things a little bit. The one thing I kind of see as maybe as a future thing, which is probably people be more cognizant of now, is more environmental impacts, right? So kind of businesses who are being a bit more understanding about the client's choice and where they are in the kind of social and economic way they do their businesses, and the corporate responsibility, I think is going to have a lot more of an impact. So as things dissipate now and people realize that, and certainly again, by the way, we're, those of us in the UK certainly, and who are in the luxurious position of start to see coming out of a very difficult time, where we know there's parts of the world who are still having a really, really hard time right now. But I've noticed a shift in people's thinking that as we start to come out of this pandemic and start to look at things, people are actually able to know more about, can ask themselves the question, okay, where's my stuff coming from? It was a year ago where it was more like, I need my stuff, I need my PPE, I need this, and now it's more like, okay, now where's it coming from? And is me asking for this going to have an impact on recycling? It's going to impact on how many miles, my carbon footprint. Retailers are going to have to very soon showcase their credentials around corporate responsibility to be able, because that's going to be a huge element of what the customer experience actually is going to be, that choice around whether they engage with someone. And I think that's something that's coming down the line.
That was exactly what, sorry, James, go on.
So it's really interesting you mentioned that as well, because it's certainly a hot topic right now. And there's so many brands that have come out of nowhere that have a real focus on the environment and negative carbon footprints. Look at Brewdog, for example. They're huge in that space. They're very active on social media about everything that they are doing, that has a positive impact into the environment itself.
I think it's a double-edged sword, because I was on a podcast in recently with again some of the colleagues over with SAP actually, and Maria Morales there. She was advocating. She's someone that we've worked with in the past for many years, and she was talking about the kind of again this kind of corporate responsibility. And I kind of mentioned to her at the time, I felt it was a double-edged sword, because again we have the luxury, right? So somebody who is able to make the decision about where something comes from is actually a privilege in itself. And I think it's an important privilege. And I think it's something which, if you can have the ability to be able to make that decision, it's a very important one to make. But there are very many people out there who do not have that ability to make that decision, because in many cases they need it, or they don't have the economic decision to be able to make that decision. So I think in some ways it's difficult, because if you're privileged to be able to make a decision about that, it's great. And while it's important from an environmental standpoint, some people who can't eat and don't care where the food comes from once it comes, right? And that's something we have to kind of be aware of, I think. The second point is also, I know that sometimes people are using this corporate responsibility element to diffuse maybe some other things that they're doing, which maybe would have been questioned as ethical in the past. And I think there's a level of potential cynicism or lack of integrity in some instances, where people are suddenly talking about the corporate responsibility, but are using it to hide or not necessarily put forward maybe their areas where they've either maybe not been great in the past, or have had to do this in a reaction because what they did in the past wasn't great, right? And I think sometimes I have to honestly say, I sometimes find it a bit disingenuous sometimes when people talk about the corporate responsibility front and center, when they have a massive history or other areas in there where it maybe is a little bit rich. And it's like, well, actually, rather than telling us about what you're doing, show it first and then come back and talk about it.
Okay. So that's going to be a key for you then, when you engage your clients, is to make sure that the target market is really well defined, because customer experience is massive. And previously the internet was dominated by how cheap you could find your product. So now there's a shift. There's a big group of people who are going to be more interested in the CX, the experience, but there's still a big group of people who just need the product at the cheapest possible price.
Exactly, and it's about finding that balance. And as you said, Tim, and again, through anybody who kind of goes onto the Greenlight website and looks at the clients that we've got, there'll be many there who would recognize businesses who are very active in this corporate responsibility space, and because it's important to their clients, right? And therefore, if it's important to my client, my client's customers and my customer's customer, that's it's important to us. So again, that's always the question that we'll ask, because it can inform the digital marketing strategy or the content strategy or the functionality in the system. Particularly even think something as simple as like capturing data. If a business wants to prove that corporate responsibility, then they need to capture data to be able to feed it into a corporate responsibility program that they may have to be able to record that data. And again, we do that internally in Greenlight, right? So we've been assessed, and I think we have a carbon neutrality accreditation, which I don't think there's many businesses who talk about that, and we don't actively shout about it, but we've got it, and it's there when we talk to customers, and we talk about that's there because we think it's important. It's important to the culture that we have, and I think it certainly resonates with clients when we talk to about them. It's we think it's important, and therefore it makes it as a thing that when a time is right, we tell a client that we have it because we think it resonates to them personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that is much more important to a lot of people, particularly the age group that we normally hire from here, the people in their early to mid-20s. It's become more and more important. Something that also has become a bit of a buzzword. I'm still not sure what to make of it, but headless commerce is a concept. So with big commerce, that's the key theme running through their business. What are your views on headless commerce? Is it not something that has always been available to retailers, but not really been kind of encapsulated in one phrase?
Yeah, I'd agree with that to a certain extent. I think that, certainly over the last 5 years, at least, the concept of being a headless commerce has been around. And in fact, many of the vendors have provided it, albeit though at a different scale. So there's some platforms who have had to retrofit part of their capability in their offering to be able to provide this concept of a headless commerce approach. Other businesses just happen to have, when they built their platform, kind of considered this modularity in mind, and therefore is easier for them to, as they're evolving and building their software and continually evolving it, just by the nature of the way they've architected it, the systems are headless and therefore provide more flexibility and capability. So for the customers that we work with, the partners we work with, headless capabilities have been there for many years, but some probably do it a little bit better than others, or do it in different ways and better than others, and therefore it's been there. And I think for us, it's always about, there's not right or wrong with headless commerce, and there's not right or wrong with this concept of what people are calling the monoliths now, having these big platforms that which frankly there's a lot of disinformation about, which is marketing, right? People will talk about all these different things, and for those of us who've been in the industry, it's just sometimes a different way of talking about the same thing. It's not what's right or wrong. It's about what the client's attempting to achieve and mapping their evolution of what they want to get to, and using the technology in the right way to help them on that evolution and help them on those steps to success. So in some instances, headless it looks apparent. It could be the right thing for them to do for day one, or it could be a better thing for them to ease into later. There are consequences to every decision, and the clients just need to understand what those consequences are. And there's some consequences are positive and some consequences are negative. So they just need to understand, but by doing these different things, what it actually means. And once they know that, they're then making the decisions properly informed. And that's the thing we want to always try and do, is make sure customers are quite informed. When the client says to us, we want a project, we want to go headless. Why? And then when you suddenly ask or get down to the root cause of why they've said this, we go, oh, okay, now we know where you want to get to. Yeah, okay, that does make sense. Or, no, we know we don't want to get to, maybe there's another way you could do this, and you could still achieve that result of headless, or the end result, but in a slightly different way. And that's really what we're trying to today. So I think headless is an architectural principle that's been around for a while. It just needs to fit the right business and technology use cases.
Guess it goes back to making sure the clients are educated, doesn't it, really? And it's very, I'm sure you get it all the time where you get inquiries and, yeah, we want to go microservices, headless, etc. But why? Do you not understand that actually this is a full business transformation in some cases, and actually you're not set up to do this? Or, okay, well, this is going to take 24 months, but we want to go live in 3. Well, they're probably not going to happen.
And it's all of that, James. It's all about kind of educating the client and just tells them that. So I think that's, you know, again, there's nothing inherently wrong with headless. There's nothing right with headless, right? It has to use the right case. And again, when you know, we've seen customers where, yeah, they come to us and say, we want to do these things, and it's like, okay, that's great. And there's pros and cons to them, but I definitely think that there's the constraints under which they're working in, or what we do have found more recently in that they usually are going down a route because they're having such an adverse reaction to a previous experience they've had, and suddenly are throwing the baby out with the water, right? And just kind of go, okay, they were on a large monolith kind of project and stuff, and they suddenly go, okay, now we have to go all completely the other way and go headless, and go, okay, well, understanding the root causes of why you felt you were feeling pain at that time, analyze that first, and then you might find whether actually it was just the right project but the wrong implementation. It was the right project but the wrong customer, because sometimes the customer can't help themselves making wrong decisions due to the culture. So sometimes you're going to find, actually, no, understand before you go all the way one to the other side, just understand what the problems were when you started, and then you might find actually what you did was the right thing to do, but just the environment wasn't right, or the partner wasn't right, or the technology wasn't quite ready for it, but now it's ready for it. Or you go, actually, no, you were right for a type of business that you are, that was completely wrong. Everything was wrong. You should go and start from this new architecture because this is maybe right. It just becomes a set of timing and history. History should be, not forgotten, but it shouldn't directly have such an adverse effect that it skews your future making decision because you've gone such an adverse direction because of what happened to you previously.
Yeah, I think as well, in the last few years, there's been such a push on social, and a lot of the companies that are now, or have been the challenger platforms, they've been very pro on the whole headless commerce and pushing out in the market. And I think to a lot of people who are uneducated, they see these articles and videos saying like death to monolith and all of this stuff, and it's like, oh wow, well, we need to make the jump, and it's almost like a panic reaction. And I think that probably spurs a lot of it because these companies are so good at marketing.
It is, but I think it's one of those things where I think it's because they're kind of new and they're interesting, right? And I think and again, don't get me wrong, I think some of these platforms are great as well. I think, but the products is only as good as the solution you're looking to try and make a fix, right? And so if there's a client who has a very, very good need and has a defined use for that need, then these are great platforms that become very cost effective, that are well used, that provide and fix certain problems. But otherwise, they just turn into buzzwords or buzz concepts, and therefore they lose the weight then over time of what they have, the power of what they can really deliver. And I think sometimes in the right use case, they can be very powerful. But as I said, we've worked with headless projects and headless technology before. We've delivered projects in 4 to 6 weeks. We've worked with the so-called monoliths. We've delivered projects going live in 4 to 6 weeks, right? And a number of things need to come together to make those things happen. And it's not just technology.
So, sorry, James, but
There you go.
We've obviously had a lot of marketing around headless commerce and the concept and why it's so important for retailers to consider. And I think, like you say, sometimes that can get a bit lost. One of the things that hasn't been spoken about as much, it's spoken about in itself, which is cryptocurrency, but I've not really seen much in the way of how cryptocurrency is going to impact retailers, and as and when they adopt it as a form of payment, how's that going to impact on how you guys deliver their digital commerce end-to-end solutions? It's got to have quite a big impact, in my view.
In some ways, and we have had a couple of customers in the past who have inquired about it, right? And about, this, and I think a lot of them are trying to use it as a way of being able to just show how progressive they are in some instances. And But I think because within the e-commerce space, and particularly because of the concepts around PCI compliance and around indemnification and things like that, that many of the platforms themselves now have already aligned with payments providers who provide, and the gateways provide multiple different entry points into different payment services. So from us, and when we're kind of coming together with offering those services to clients, actually it becomes easy for us at an integration perspective, because we just piggyback off the back of a payment provider who will just open up the crypto integration as part of their existing payment gateways. So for us, it's kind of, it becomes an easier play for us. Where it becomes more interesting is about how businesses want to use those concepts and anything beyond just the payment element to it. But more businesses who kind of look to take some of the kind of technology underpinning it and around the kind of the transparency and maybe go back to around the supply chain and around that kind of blockchain concepts around where things have come from and be able to understand its provenance. But from actually pure payments perspective, you know, we as Greenlight, one of the things we do is we worked with some of the payment providers to do pre-integrations of their payment gateways for some of the platforms we work with. So we build a tech that allows other SIs to be able to use these payment providers on those technologies. And so we, you know, crypto has been spoken about, but it's I mean, gosh, I don't know about you guys, but depending upon which crypto you're talking about, I'm not quite sure whether anybody who could buy one or if you want to start dealing with 0.001 of crypto coin to pay for a coffee, it's probably going to be anywhere near anytime soon.
That's very true. I am trying to learn it at the minute. It's obviously a lot to get your head around, but obviously like Bitcoins, for example, where the value of one Bitcoin is, I think, about £40,000 currently. Yeah, you're not going to buy a coffee for like 0.00001. I think the transaction cost of the Bitcoin itself far outweighs the coffee. But just the evolution of crypto itself and where it was to is and where it's going to be in 5 years, along with the blockchain technology itself, is certainly very interesting. And I think there's going to be a big shakeup in the next 10 years. Regulation
is what's going to happen. Because I think one of the things I presume is probably one of the barriers in some ways is that retailers may not want to touch it, because if they suddenly start to have lots of their payments from clients coming through crypto and something happens and they are exposed, then they've lost money, right? So imagine where a customer who's doing, so we've got clients who do 200,000 orders a day. And, you know, imagine at a certain point in time, within 5 seconds of something dive bombing in with regards to crypto values, suddenly at the point in time a payment is taken, they could wipe off, you know, 30 or 40 grand in the space of 10 minutes, which could be margin for them. Yeah. So a client will go, actually, you know what, maybe that's not right for us because it's too volatile.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a perfect point, and that's something that you feel quite strongly about as well, isn't it, Tim? With the fact that until it's regulated, then maybe that's going to stunt the adoption into retail. But then that goes against the whole point of it.
Well, that's it, isn't it? But I think there'll come a point where if like you say, Kev, big retailers are going to adopt it as a payment method, they're going to want some security that it's not going to fall through the floor, and all of a sudden they've lost their entire margin and then some. And that's the beauty of the stability of GBP or the US dollar, for example. But for me, it's really interesting because I'm just waiting to see one of the big retailers adopt it. I guess it will happen at some point, but I'm not sure when and who's kind of prepared to go first, really.
Someone will, but I think part of me thinks it'll be a gimmick or a marketing ploy, because I'd be very interested to hear what their business case other than that would be to say, hey, we're going to do this because it's at a critical mass that we definitely have identified a demographic of people who will want to spend money with us via cryptocurrency. And unless they're in a specific area like gaming, maybe, but then we're not talking about standard retail here, right?
No.
I mean, there is one of the big American I mean, I'm not sure if it's a baseball or American football franchise, they accept certain cryptos via their websites. And they said their sales shot through the roof. But again, going back to what you said, I think it's the perfect marketing strategy right now. We now accept this. So it's just like, cool, let's have a rush and let's go and buy something that we don't want or we don't need. So I can actually use my crypto to buy something.
I think it probably works better at the whole kind of virtual concept. So I can imagine someone like, not that I'd ever do it, but Apple or Epic Games, someone like that, where actually, particularly for app purchases and things like that, where actually you're not dealing with real cash, you're kind of dealing with virtual, and it's not as if I'm going to buy, and this is more for the kind of hardware side, more the software side. If you've built something, you're just giving a copy of one digital asset to someone. If you're sending an iPhone, you want the cash for that iPhone, because you've spent money buying that. And I think in some ways, maybe for more the virtual style products, which are kind of non-consumer packaged goods or non-physical, yeah. I think it worked for the more virtual, because you've a bit of indemnification there, because ultimately you're just selling stuff you're selling duplicates of stuff you've already made, right? Which is different to buying something that somebody else had to make.
Yeah, well, I guess look, we'll watch this space, because it's certainly something that's not going to be going away. So give it a couple of years. It'd be interesting to look back on this and see how things have further developed, and if it has moved into mainstream retail, or if it is just in virtual, like you say, or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, watch this space. We may be talking again in the near future.
Well, exactly. And as I said, just for the record, I will take my fee in crypto if you want to spend it.
You're a believer, Kev.
Well, I think we could probably talk for another hour at this rate about crypto and other bits around e-com tech. But we'd really like to get to our last three questions that we ask everyone, Kev, if that's all right.
Sure.
So they're the questions for us that we think will help everyone listening understand, from your point of view, what the future of digital commerce tech looks like over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. The first one, now I know there will be quite a few, but if you had to pick one, what would be the single biggest challenge for retailers in the next few years?
Being flexible. I think to that point I mentioned earlier, is that a retailer needs to be able to adapt very, very quickly, and they need the technology platform, not just the commerce, but all the way through, to be able to make changes very, very quickly. And I think that the challenge retailers have is that they don't know what the next challenge is going to be. That's the reality. And we've seen that more recently. And I think we're going to continue to see that, because the expectations of customers are continually changing. And if you want to keep selling, if retailers want to keep selling to customers that they've got, they need to keep being relevant. And if they're, and therefore, whatever goods or services they want, they need to keep being relevant to those goods and services.
Interesting. It's going to be a difficult task to be that flexible, particularly when you're at tier one retailer size.
Yes and no. I think there's a culture shift and a culture change, because you can, and again, thanks to technology today, and even these so-called monoliths compared to, if you like, the kind of headless technology providers, all these technologies are still considered modern. And with the right partners, with the right mentality, with the right kind of customer thought process and thinking, you can move quickly, and you can be adaptable, and you can be cost effective. You just need to embrace it and you need to take the leap. And some businesses are not quite there yet.
Okay.
Flexibility is a good point, and actually that leads nicely on to the second question, because the second question is what will the high street look like in 5 years? And I'd expect there would be an awful lot of flexibility required for it to be successful.
So yeah, I think, we've obviously seen the high street itself kind of change a little bit over the last few years, but I think that's, lots of people would say e-commerce and online has killed the high street and stuff, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think maybe over expansion, or maybe too many financial hurdles based upon lack of flexibility in maybe kind of property, or kind of destination in the high street being a problem, right? So businesses we've seen go pop, which were good businesses but were signed into upwardly rising 5 or 10 year leasing agreements, and that they had to lock into no matter what happened in the industry or their business, just caused too many problems, right? So I think the high street will just evolve into being still a physical destination, but we maybe won't see as many of maybe certain retailers having as many stores in every single town, but they will definitely be opportunities for people to go physically see a store, because it's a destination to either view, browse, pick up, service, support, and really kind of hone in that omni-channel concept. So the concept thing isn't going to go away. I think we'll just see retailers being a bit cleverer about understanding what they want the space to be, and again, being flexible within that space. I mean, there's nothing to say that why, if you had the right physical setup of a store, why during the summer months or during one quarter, a store couldn't be a kind of a come in and browse our store, and then just before Christmas time, it's like a pop-up. It suddenly converts itself into a click and collect store, to like an Argos, where you just have a desk, come up with a phone, pick up your stuff. Like the flexibility in the actual spaces themselves. You know, again, sorry, straight after Christmas, it could be a return store, and then in February or March, it could be hey, we're doing a spring launch. You can't buy anything here today, but if you come and browse the racks that we have and you click on it, you can have it sent to your house. Okay. And again, if you have the technology and the POS systems and the e-commerce systems to be able to do all of those changes and change your flexibility of your environment, that's what I think the future is going to look like for the high street retailer.
That is super flexible, to be able to change your offerings within the store over the different times of the year, and that's really flexible. We've actually seen a lot of the pop-up stores have success, haven't we? And even companies like Klarna, who aren't a retail brand themselves, have had very successful pop-up stores for their customers.
Yeah, I mean, look, Klarna we consider obviously one of the enablers, right, for those businesses who, you know, want now, pay later, and those businesses want to be able to offer that service. Klarna could be the gateway into offering those particular capabilities, and then as well as kind of PayPal more so, and more recently, and there's a few others where they're the enablers to products to open up to a demographic where those retailers didn't realize those customers were available to them before. They're only now available through this kind of commercial arrangement with a buy now, pay later model.
That's interesting. I've never actually thought about that level of flexibility with the retail setup itself. You see, for years it's just been historically, these are our products and we have them on for you to view and try on and buy, and that's it. But that actually makes a lot more sense in terms of what the high street might look like. And it goes back to a few conversations I've had recently around customer experience being the key part of the actual bricks and mortar store now, is the engagement and the actual experience that you get when you go through the store, not just go in, pick something and buy it.
Primark is a great example of that when they opened up their store in Birmingham, right? So in that biggest Primark they have, part of their global store rollout, in store you've got a salon, you've got a cafe, Disney cafe, you've got so that's an interest. Again, they've created a destination. So, and they know you get footfall in the store, somebody doesn't come out with just one bag.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? A lot of companies are taking that approach, aren't they? A lot of shops, with coffee shops built internally. I think Pret's just signed an agreement with Tesco's potentially. I saw it online yesterday. To have Pret's in their stores. Obviously, they've traditionally had Costas. You've got what was Debenhams used to have Costas in the store. So I think that's slowly being adopted anyway. Sainsbury's, Argos, etc. It's getting the customer in, and once they're in, right, giving them multiple things that they can purchase.
I think one of the more recent ones, which I think people are kind of following the model, and I'm sure there's examples there of earlier ones, but Costa and Next, right? The Costa and Next tie up, and the amount of kind of, having a coffee shop in a closed store is great, because depending on who you are, you're either being left in the aisles while someone's going off trying on stuff, and so you've got somewhere to go for a coffee. Or after halfway through kind of shopping and you need to pick me up, great, go in, have a coffee, and then continue on. A great example of again, a reason to why to visit.
Maybe we can get Wetherspoons in Sainsbury's.
I definitely think you kind of, having two places that both sell alcohol at the same time will create a really interesting clash.
Okay, so last question for us is, if you were forced to pick one, what would you say would be the most disruptive piece of tech within digital commerce in the next 12 months? Disruption
is an interesting one, because I think disruption depends upon who the person, who the business is and what sector they are in. I honestly at the moment don't know, because there's been so much volatility in the market and there's so many things that have come up. I think that and frankly, I've been wrong so many times on predictions. Every year we do predictions and kind of things that I've seen come up is that what I could say is that, not it's kind of sidestepping the question, we're going to see a lot of innovation. Okay. Because coming out of difficult periods and situations, we get to see people thinking and understanding more, and therefore coming up with new ideas based upon their personal, in most cases, difficult situations. And therefore, out through those difficulties comes great ideas, right? And I think I haven't necessarily seen a technology yet. And again, you know, there's loads of chatbots, there's loads of AI opportunities, but they're usually all talking about the same thing that's kind of already there, but just flavored in something different. Anything that's truly disruptive, I'm even trying to think about what the last thing that was truly disruptive. And I think the last truly disruptive thing I could really think about came out 10 years ago, which was mobile. Right? I don't know whether you, and that's what I would consider being an expert in the industry, where I can think what was a really last truly disruptive thing. Even when we talk about something like Klarna, like buy now, pay later, is that disruptive? Well, no, people have been putting things on tick for many years, right? All they've done is digitized it.
Yeah.
People talk about the idea of kind of Deliveroo and Just Eat. Well, yeah, okay, delivery's been around for a time. So is the concept disruptive? No, it's a very clever way of being able to open up and engage and bring two desperate things, which was, I got drivers who do driving and I've got products who need delivering, and actually how do I make those work and how can I be the intermediary? So again, whether it's massively disruptive, I mean, even things like clone delivery now, really interesting. So I say clone, excuse me, drones, and maybe who clones could be the future, who knows, right? Maybe that's a Freudian slip there, maybe thinking about clones as the future, I don't know. Drones where yeah, great idea, but is it truly revolutionary? Is it just evolving? And I think for me, something has to be disruptive. I kind of see it as more of the revolution rather than the evolution. So I suppose it's a bit of a cop out here. I really don't know yet.
No, we're not prepared to lay your cards on the table just yet.
Jury's still out due to the amount of change that we've had. I think that, yeah, something to be truly disruptive. I set my standard high about disruption, and I really don't know what that disruption is going to be quite yet.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you very much. It's been really, really interesting to get some of your views and thoughts on how we're going to shape the future of digital commerce. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
Tim, James, you're welcome. Good to speak to you.
Well, that is us wrapping up another edition of the FODcast. Thank you for everyone who has listened. Hope you found this edition as interesting as the others, and we will see you in a few weeks.